I consider following Peterson on Twitter a part of my job. So in addition from the tweets from people I actually want to be seeing, I get a subset of his daily barrage. Usually it's a very simple retweet of some alt-writer, signal boosting some conspiracy theory or thoughts plucked out of his own head. But every once in a while, there's gold. And in this case, the funny part wasn't even Peterson's tweet. So, he'll periodically advertise his various projects. This time it was the essay writing app that's supposed to teach people how to think critically in addition to writing. What we get is a strange sentence break, smiley face, and verbiage that could have been worked to parse more naturally. I quote tweeted it because seriously, what is with that first sentence? And finally, the reason you got all this set up and why I'm sharing it. Aaron answered my question, blaming it on Peterson's all-meat diet. Mwah. No notes. This video made possible thanks to the continuing support of viewers, patrons, and PayPal pals like you. Thanks! Hi, welcome back. I'm Cass, a cognitive psychologist with a surprising immunity for Lovecraft by way of lobster-induced insanity. Time to start the next rule. Ooh. The description from the overture of "Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated" is that it will argue that the important meaning that will carry you through life is to be found through the adoption of mature responsibility, not happiness. Which, sure, focusing your life on how happy you are is probably going to leave you feeling unhappy, since unbridled happiness can be fleeting, but will this chapter actually successfully argue this? Or are there going to be long, weird asides that lose sight of the point? Rhetorical question is rhetorical. I'll also point out the chapter art is of Atlas, the mythological Greek titan who is sentenced to hold up the celestial spheres for fighting against the Olympians in the Titanomachy. If I'm not mistaken, the women are the Hesperides, Atlas's daughters, who were, among other things, guardians of Hera's orchard which contained the golden apples. These apples had a couple adventures, one of which led to the Trojan War. Zeus threw a banquet for some people getting married, but the goddess of discord was not invited. To fuck with the partygoers, she threw a golden apple into the mix with an inscription that read, "For the most beautiful." The goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all claimed the apple, and couldn't share, I guess. Zeus kicked the task of solving this problem downstream, so assigned it to Paris of Troy. Bribes were offered by the goddesses, and Paris gave the apple to Aphrodite, who offered him the most beautiful woman in the world's love, Helen of Sparta. There was just the teensy tiny little problem of her already being married to King Menelaus. Discord ensued, much to the apple chucker Eris's pleasure, I'm sure. It's been a while since I've mentioned it, but hey, my difficult PhD advisor once called me discordant in an email where I was standing up for myself and not wanting to cave to his bullshit. What a coincidence! Oh, speaking of, the Eris Diner merch is up on my Fourth Wall store, as is the pedantic stuff, including the pedantic pants, citation needed, and Chaos Dragon swag, for all of your discordant and chaotic needs. I'm not sure why those women are included in this image. He doesn't talk about the image at all in text, as he did with Rule 2, so the whats and whys of the intended symbols are unclear. Contrary to Peterson's claims, explicit knowledge is needed to be able to successfully read the meaning of an image. Granted, I think most people have been exposed enough to Atlas as the dude holding up the globe to be able to recognize him, but the three women? It almost looks like they're trying to tempt him out of his duties, which is part of what gives me a little doubt that these are indeed supposed to be his daughters. Although, I suppose daughters can be agents of chaos when it comes to distracting their dads away from what they were trying to do? Looking around Google Images, I couldn't find anything of Atlas and the Hesperides in the same image, aside from some collectible coin minted in 2019. The ladies with Hercules, sure, but not Atlas. What does it mean, Peterson? I'm not plugged in well enough to the collective unconscious to be able to just magically understand this. Well, enough fun with mythology. For now. It'll be back. It'll always be back. Time for the quick refresher of the visual cues indicating where ideas are coming from. This means I'm paraphrasing the book, this means I'm responding to the book, and this means we're talking references, baby! There's even one from Peterson this time. Holy shit, right? There are 6 references for this chapter, but we're only going to cover the first one today. And by cover, I mean cover. We hit some lies, damn lies, and statistics territory with this reference. Without further ado, let's get on with making ourselves invaluable to find that abdicated opportunity. We start this chapter with a bit of Peterson auto-fluffing, with how amazing he was at coaching people who worked with tyrannical narcissists. We are glazing over that to get to the point.
I do not encourage people to martyr themselves. It is a bad idea to sacrifice yourself uncomplainingly so that someone else can take the credit. Nonetheless, under such circumstances, if you are a wise and attentive person, you might still notice that your unproductive coworkers are leaving a plethora of valuable tasks undone.
We're pausing here because we'll come back to this point later. He says he's not encouraging people to martyr themselves or sacrifice themselves in this, but you can tell me how much the following advice actually fits that.
You might then ask yourself, what would happen if I took responsibility for doing them? It is a daunting question. What is left undone is often risky, difficult, and necessary. But that also means, does it not, that it is worthwhile and significant? And you may have the eyes to see that there is a problem, despite your all too frequent blindness. How do you know that it is not, therefore, your problem? Why do you notice this issue and not some other? This is a question worth considering in depth.
Again, pausing before we get to the advice part of his advice to question his premise. In the couple real jobs I've had, the tasks left undone were either busy work, which could be handled by people in between rushes, or complicated tasks that either required a couple people to do it, or should really be done by somebody who's skilled in that task. Now, it can be worthwhile to ask to be trained on that skilled task, but doing the busy work was sort of the bare minimum expected of a lot of jobs. Also, what jobs has Peterson worked where the necessary tasks weren't getting done? Those have always been a priority in the places I've worked, academic or not.
If you want to become invaluable in a workplace, in any community, just do the useful things no one else is doing. Arrive earlier and leave later than your compatriots, but do not deny yourself your life. Organize what you can see is dangerously disorganized. Work when you are working, instead of looking like you are working. And finally, learn more about the business, or your competitors, than you already know. Doing so will make you invaluable, a veritable linchpin. People will notice that and begin to appreciate your hard-earned merits.
Don't be a work martyr, but do the tasks that no one else does of your own initiative, presumably on your time in some way. Can this advice actually work? What sorts of jobs would this advice work for? I'll leave you with those questions while we talk about that note. Note 1 is to a note and a reference. Ooh. The note includes one of the claims made in the cited book, Why Men Earn More, from 2005. That working an extra 5 hours a week above 40 will get you 44% more pay. The page Peterson is pointing to is in the book's personal introduction. And okay, sure, the disproportionate pay increase claim is made on that page, but in text, it's obvious the meat for that claim is later in the book. I wonder if Peterson's son's essay writing app instructs people on things they can do to at least give the appearance of having read the source material, because this sort of laziness attracts negative attention. Like mine. The claim itself comes from page 78, and is unfortunately not supported as clearly as I would have liked. This reference 5 points us to the U.S. Department of Labor's current population survey from March of 2003. This is where things get unclear. Treating the current population survey as some form of publication isn't the way to go, which, upon further investigation, is because it doesn't seem to be one. After a bit of searching, I found the current population survey website for 2003. And look, it's even by month. Yay. But then we hit our snag. Our options here are to download the data for various OSs. The Windows one results in a CPS file format, which, if I'm understanding things correctly, is a government proprietary software to use this data. More modern datasets seem to be in things like CSV files, so I am not about to download a piece of government software a decade old to dig into this claim. There is an attempt at a web tool that looks like it should act like pivot tables, but for the life of me, I can't get it to work, so Guess we're gonna have to trust face value, maybe? Note from future me. Dr. Hubs got curious and hey, there's a Python package to get into the CPS file because, of course there is, so we had to go. We couldn't replicate the average wages that were in Farrell's book, but we also don't know which exact wage variable he was using nor what his exclusion criteria were. Some people's wages were coded with a -1, so I'm going to assume that those people were excluded from Farrell's analysis, but some people reported making less than $1 a week. Were they included? Anyways, back to your regularly scheduled me. In any case, it looks like Farrell has pointed us to a dataset that I can't really crack into, let alone know what variables or criteria he used. That's always fun. And it leaves us with a ton of unknowns. Were his averages only including wage jobs, or did they include the salaried too? Counting hours at all makes me suspect we're excluding salaried jobs, but we can't know for sure. It seems incredibly important to know the sorts of pay structures and jobs going into this conclusion. Are these work hours constrained to have come from only one job, or could it be the total from multiple? If it is from one job, being able to hit 40 hours can be a struggle for some types of work. Like, my mom worked in a catalog call center, and it was next to impossible for her to regularly hit 40 hours. So it seems like there's an element of work privilege at play here, and who this advice could possibly serve. If these are limited to pay from single jobs, this raises the issue of overtime pay. Some employers will do everything in their power to prevent employees working overtime, because the pay rate is supposed to be higher at that point. Why are we comparing 45 hours against 40? It's suggestive that this was a point of maximal effect, with possible diminishing returns beyond 45 hours that could weaken his argument, or some weird relationship between 40 hours and 45 hours that might be saying something about overtime pay. Like, there's a lot hiding here. Basically, I'm suspicious of the validity of this claim. There's too many unknowns in this average worker comparison to know if this difference would apply to individual cases. And I also doubt Farrell's later conclusion that the extra pay is from an attitude that will directly provide this pay boost. With regard to the book itself, the 12-minute book summary blog's critical review of the book calls into question the types of data supporting Farrell's arguments, which may limit the meaningfulness of his conclusions. With that out of the way, we can talk about Peterson's use of this claim. He says to be there earlier and later than your coworkers, which would potentially get you that extra 5 hours a week, I guess, but only if you're there a half hour earlier and later than people, which in my experience as a grad student was as much about the perception of how much you're working as doing the actual work itself. But this is brushing up against the disturbing fetishization of work that has been becoming more popular recently. I've talked about it before, so I won't go into it here, but I am of the controversial belief that our job shouldn't be our life. Peterson won't really address this issue as, try to contain your surprise here. This indispensability at work advice is in a side paragraph as set up for his point about deriving meaning from your job. Generally, this advice only really seems relevant to a particular subset of jobs, the sorts where you'd have a physical office with other coworkers with relatively low physical danger. It doesn't seem to entirely work for retail or food service jobs, as those can be quite ticked off at you for arriving early or staying late, unless you're working for free. But don't do that. Never give the man free labor. There's also typically not much of a reason for most people working at business sites to gather intel on the competition or bother learning about the company. Those sorts of issues are handled up the chain at the corporate main offices, and the local employees will have no choice but to learn the corpo propaganda at the regular, mandatory all-hands meetings. Finally, Peterson's assertion that people will take notice and begin to appreciate your hard-earned merits is laughable. Granted, there are exceptions to this. Some bosses or workplaces do reward these sorts of things. But to just give this advice and tell people to do this without any nuance or caveats that, hey, maybe it'll work out like I said, but maybe it won't. And now you'll be shackled with the extra expectations that you sort of set for yourself through this advice, and no reward to show for it. This is especially true if the workplace is full of the people he just described on the previous page, the narcissistic, incompetent, malevolent, or tyrannical coworkers or bosses. The next thread is a hypothetical someone objecting to this invaluability advice by saying that they couldn't possibly take on something important. Setting himself up with the softball objection. Yeah, it does fit with where his argument's going, but it feels deepity-ish. He says that if you don't feel like you can handle the big important problems, work your way up to it by starting with these smaller, less important problems. He does an inversion of the meaning flip where he would be using one word but switching out the meanings of it, where he's using one meaning but different terms for it. He does a quick flip between the level of importance and responsibility mid-paragraph before steering this back to work advice. Under reasonable circumstances, taking on extra work responsibility will lead to you becoming invaluable.
And then, if you want to negotiate for a raise or more autonomy, or more free time for that matter, you can go to your boss and say, "Here are 10 things that were crying out to be done, each of them vital, and I am now doing all of them. If you help me out a bit, I will continue. I might even improve. And everything, including your life, will improve along with me." And then, if your boss has any sense, and sometimes bosses do, then your negotiation will be successful. That is how such things work.
You serious?
I know there's an evergreen debate about how much Peterson believes his own stuff, but I could see him sincerely believing this is how things work. That if you aren't able to successfully negotiate with your boss after following his advice, it's because you fucked something up along the way. Not that there are profit-driven motivations to accept the extra work without the slightest thought of compensation. Why bother milking the cow when it will give you its milk for free? Plus, in this economy and work culture, most workers are easily replaceable. If anything, taking on this extra work gratis means you might dodge a round or two of layoffs or firings, not that you'll get a raise. Now, the reason for the pivot to talking about this in terms of responsibility, with another quick pivot to difficulty, because what is meaning, really?
What do you mean, do?
It appears that the meaning that most effectively sustains life is to be found in the adoption of responsibility. When people look back on what they have accomplished, they think, if they are fortunate, well, I did that, and it was valuable. It was not easy, but it was worth it. It is a strange and paradoxical fact that there is a reciprocal relationship between the worth of something and the difficulty of accomplishing it. Imagine the following conversation. Do you want difficulty? No, I want ease. In your experience, has doing something easy been worthwhile? Well, no, not very often. Then perhaps you really want something difficult. I think that is the secret to the reason for being itself. Difficult is necessary.
Oh, surprise being with a capital B. Again. Not that he's introduced it at all in this book. I don't think difficult is necessary is fully capturing things, at least for me. Like, I fully concede that if life was easy mode all the time, I probably would seek out extra challenge, which slots in nicely with the idea that people will seek out things that are at an optimum level of difficulty. Not so difficult that you get frustrated or stuck, but also not so easy that you don't even have to try. Csikszentmihalyi relates this to flow, or a sort of state of consciousness you can slide into when you are at the intersection of having a clear task or goal that is at the sweet difficulty spot appropriate to your skill, and your conscious experience becomes focused on the task. In flow, he says these states are a way to build meaning into our lives. With how close this is to what Peterson's talking about here, like chapter Cheating Chaos, followed by the Making of Meaning, I'm almost surprised this wasn't referenced. Although, as snarkily included in my flow reference, that book does cover similar finding meaning territory to Peterson, but with much less woo and style madness, so perhaps Peterson didn't want to risk losing his audience. Anyways, I wouldn't say that things have to be difficult, optimum or not, all of the time. Like playing games with your hypothetical kids. If they're young enough, you're not going to be throwing something like rhombic chess at them, but even a simple game like Candyland can give you a meaningful experience. A point that came up in the last 12 rules bears repeating here. It's okay to just relax. Everything you do doesn't have to be in the purpose of your growth or building meaning or maximizing your stats. It's okay to just vibe and enjoy things. But speaking of games, he says we like giving ourselves limitations because it's a way to boost the perceived difficulty of things. His example is playing a game. I swear, if it's not stories in this book, it's games. There is a lot of words to basically say, paraphrased, A Calvin ball isn't and couldn't possibly be fun. Calvin Ball, if you aren't familiar, was a game played by the comic book characters Calvin and Hobbes. The only consistent rules of the game were that you had to wear a mask, and the game couldn't be played with the same rules twice. Beyond that, the rules and objective of the game were improvised. This comic is hopefully an illustrative example because defining it any further than that is just going to be a play-by-play of the various instances of the game in the comics anyways. Calvin stole Hobbes' flag, but then he got hit by the Calvin ball, so he had to sing the I'm Very Sorry song despite being in the no song zone, because he wasn't actually in the zone because Hobbes oppositely declared the zone as such by not declaring it, and so on. It seems only fitting that Peterson wouldn't be able to find the fun in a game with such a chaotic structure.
Because chess is not fun, oddly enough, if you can move any piece anywhere. It is not a game anymore if you can make any old move at all. Accept some limitations, however, and the game begins. Accept them, more broadly speaking, as a necessary part of being and a desirable part of life. Assume that you can transcend them by accepting them, and then you can play the limited game properly.
Of course, we're still seeing echoes of the creative conservative from this book's first rule. He's previously argued that creative transformation of social institutions, among other things, can only come forth when tightly constrained. That Harry Potter was an exemplar of this, in that he mostly followed the rules, but creatively broke them when it was the moral thing to do. Just like Jesus. Here, the lesson is apparently that we need to accept the arbitrary rules of the life game as a means of transcending them. Talk about a monkey's paw wish gone awry. In 12 Rules, one of the complaints I had was that the different rules didn't really have cohesion with each other. Now I want him to stop bringing up the creative conservative thing from the first rule. This is the fourth time it's shown up in this book, and we're on Rule 4. I suppose that fits for the whole going beyond order into chaos and back out into order that this book is supposed to be focusing on. If you take creative conservatives as true, valid, appropriate for that to work, curse complaints aside, how do we transcend the arbitrary rules of life by accepting them? How does this relate to finding meaning in life through responsibility and challenge? Well, I can tell you that games doesn't come up again in this chapter, other than a very, very brief games of being, so it's not going to be explained through that metaphor. Perhaps the last paragraph of this section will help.
That is not all merely of psychological import, and it is by no means just a game. People need meaning, but problems also need solving. It is very salutary, from the psychological perspective, to find something of significance, something worth sacrificing for, or to, something worth confronting and taking on. But the suffering and malevolence that characterize life are real, with the terrible consequences of the real. And our ability to solve problems by confronting them and taking them on is also real. By taking responsibility, we can find a meaningful path, improve our personal lot psychologically, and make what is intolerably wrong better. Thus, we can have our cake and eat it too.
Knowing him, it's a fucking oatmeal raisin cake or something. Okay, I have to admit, I'm having trouble parsing the meaning of this last paragraph, so let's break it down. People need meaning, and problems need solving. Significant things are worth sacrificing for, or to, or are something worth tackling. These significant things are good to find psychologically, whatever that means. Other things that are real, suffering, evil, and bad outcomes, but also our problem-solving ability. So from all of that, I'm going to assume taking responsibility here means solving problems. So, we can find meaning and improve our psychological lot by solving problems, while also solving suffering, evil, and negative outcome problems. Right. For some strange reason, I feel compelled to share one of Peterson's poems from the ABCs of childhood tragedy. Specifically, I'm really resonating with Oscar's obtuseness as a result of his oafish father's confusing words right now. As much as I want to pick up the pace of getting through this material, we're going to call this video here. Bullshit asymmetry principle, am I right? To give you a sense of what's coming, the next section, responsibility and meaning, is going to involve some discussion of some of the core beliefs of Buddhism, a recap and discussion of Peter Pan, especially the textual content that conflicts with the interpretation he's pulling from the Disney version, the Greek god Pan, as well as some discussion and contextualization of some Jewish beliefs and stories. And that's just the next section. Following that, we've got section 3, Rescue Your Father, Osiris and Horus, which may go quick because it's largely focused on Egyptian myths, although I thought the same for the Enuma Elish, and that was absolutely not a quick process. Section 4 is And Who Might That Be?, which is about taking care of future you and also zebras. 5 is Happiness and Responsibility, arguing that you need to build your happiness on responsibility. And last is a lengthy section called Pick Up the Extra Weight, which seems to be written in the style madness that used to be reserved for the last paragraph or even page of a rule. This book is a lot, which I suppose it would have a hard time being anything other than that, seeing as how the author is a lot. Well, too much for me to handle in 1 week, that's for sure. Until next time, bye.